Schoenberger is an associate professor of clinical medicine at the Keck School of Medicine at USC. She currently serves as the vice chair of operations and clinical education for the Department of Emergency Medicine at Los Angeles County and USC Medical Center. She was previously the EM residency director at the USC program for 8 years and is board certified in hospice and palliative care, in addition to emergency medicine. She's an editor for MRAP and won the Educator of the Year award given by the California ACEP chapter in 2018. So on behalf of myself and Dr. Moshe Weisberg, I would like to welcome everybody to listening to the program. And Dr. Schoenberger, I look forward to hearing your talk.
Thanks, Marianne. Thanks everybody for joining and being here for this talk. I really appreciate the opportunity to present to you. And thanks, Tina, for all of your coordination and technical expertise. We really appreciate it. So I am really happy to be here to talk about this topic. It's actually something I'm pretty passionate about. I have been in my department for 16 years now, and I think I have street smarts about this topic. I've been through 3 different chairs in my department. I'm a program director who was a director of a program that was on probation, had to navigate our way out of that. I'm also someone who's actually naturally kind of introverted, and I was a very reluctant person who accepted that I had to network with other people and started doing some public speaking, even though I was terrified. And so communication to me was like a barrier that I've sort of learned to jump over, and I've really learned to appreciate how important it is. Good communication skills can help you through so many things, and poor ones just absolutely destroy you. And it's really, really difficult to overcome when this is a fundamental problem that you have in terms of embracing leadership positions. So I hope that I can offer something to you today, and at the end we'll have some time for discussion and questions, because I'm sure many of you also have insights about good communication skills and things that make people good communicators. So I want to talk about mostly communication in the workplace, and this really starts with how we meet people, and it carries through to our connections to them and how we talk to people. A relationship to the person that we're talking to really matters. What we're talking about matters. There's a lot of factors when it comes to determining how you communicate with somebody. It's not just one size fits all. And we all have little individual characteristics about us that we have to think about, and we could sometimes improve upon. So I'm hoping that today we could talk about some general principles. Then I want to share with you a couple of like faculty development communication tools that you might consider using for yourself or for your team, and then sort of open it up for questions and see what people have to say about this. So I want to make clear first at the beginning that there are some things that we're not talking about today. These are also really important topics in terms of communication, but they have their own caveats and are kind of beyond the scope of what we're going to do today. So obviously when you talk to patients, that kind of communication, super important about what we do, different than what I'm talking about. Public speaking skills, obviously communication, but obviously a different set of skills as well. And then when you're talking about a team working in a resuscitation, we all know that there's a way to do that. There's a way to do it well. And that's also not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about sort of day-to-day workplace, other types of regular communication that we have, and the styles that we deal with. So let's kind of get into our communication skills and style. And I'm going to start with what I call just basic people skills, because I think these are sort of the cornerstone of good communication. And some of these are things that are really obvious, but when you step back and you kind of think about yourself, put a mirror to yourself and to others, you'll find that these are like critical in how we deal with other people. So these include things like eye contact. We can all think of people that we communicate with that either don't make good eye contact and how that can sometimes really bother us, and people sometimes who are almost even too intense with the eye contact. I mean, you can overdo this and underdo this, and there's just sort of a happy medium, but that is part of your communication and how people interpret you when you're talking to them. Your body language, super important. You know, how you use your hands to modify your communication. Do you have funny, fidgety things that you do that could also affect or distract people when you're trying to communicate with them? These are all really important too. How about personal space? The close talker, the person that, you know, gets a little bit too close. These things are part of your communication and how people react to you when you're trying to talk to them. Also part of it. And then your use of touch. I like it when people sometimes, you know, pat me on the arm when they're talking to me. Other people don't want to be touched, but that is something that some people use to modulate their communication or emphasize a point or connect to someone personally. But that is also a personal style and one that has to be modulated as well. Now, I want to move on to some common blind spots in communication. When we're talking about leadership and communication styles, these are things that leaders sometimes walk into and can be prevented if we kind of think about them in advance. So let's talk about some of these pitfalls. So the first one would be equating information with communication. Sharing information with people is not necessarily communicating with them. And often, as the person who has the information, we think sometimes that we've communicated more about that information than we actually have. So, just giving people information isn't necessarily communication. As leaders, sometimes we assume or we act like we know everything, that we know best. And sometimes this is a pitfall for new leaders because they don't want to seem vulnerable. And obviously, for people who've been in leadership for a while, this is another thing that they kind of step into, just acting like nobody else's opinion matters. And so communicating in a way that, it's my way or the highway is obviously a blind spot and can be a pitfall. This goes along with the second one, which is being afraid to ask for help, to actually say that this is something that we could use collaboration on. This is something that I could use some more input on, opening yourself up for others to communicate with you about something that you're trying to tell them is a really good quality in a leader. And then playing the blame game. I mean, this is something that leaders step into all the time by kind of thinking that, again, it benefits me by really saying who did what. But real leaders kind of, they see that that's not really that productive, and to take it upon yourself to try to solve problems and not just point fingers at others. So ultimately can make you look bad, even though you think that you're like shielding, when you put your defenses up and blame others, that maybe you look okay in the end, but you don't, because that's often, as a leader, not the way to go. Being unwilling to admit your mistakes, to say that maybe you said something wrong or that maybe that was a bad call, is something that could elevate you in the leadership world and is part of your communication style to be able to acknowledge that kind of thing, but is also a pitfall and can certainly undermine you should you not be able to admit your mistakes. And then I would advise you to know kind of who your truth tellers are in your circles. I know the people that I trust, that after a meeting or after an interaction, I can say, how did you think that went? How did I do up there? And people will tell me, I think you came across a little defensive. Who are the people that can actually give you some feedback to help you improve as you go along? There are other people that and especially if they're in, if there's a power relationship and they're not going to tell you, they're not going to give you negative feedback. So you have to kind of know who are the people who, and sometimes it's mentors that play this in a really important way to give you feedback on how you presented at a faculty meeting or how you came across, to help you develop your communication skills and your communication style to make you a little more effective. So knowing who those people are in your circle can help you go a long way, help you grow in this area. So this is like a famous book, Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It was published in 1936, and it's still around. And the reason that this book is still around and people talk about it is because there's a lot of real truths in here about how to relate to people successfully. And ultimately, good communication skills is about relating to people successfully. And so this book has I just want to spend one slide on sharing some of the wisdom in this book. And say that it is worth a read. I will say that I had heard about this book like a long time ago, and I, sort of like, yeah, it sounds like a business book to me. I'm not sure that I'd be interested in it. But actually, when you start reading it, you're like, that is so true. That is so true. People that I know that are good communicators do this really well. So let me just share with you a few of the principles in this book that I think can be useful as you reflect upon your communication style and skill and try to improve it. So these are 6 ways to make people like you. And ultimately, if people like you, they will often listen to you, and they often will give you more leeway in terms of, making mistakes if they actually like you. And so these seem so obvious, but you kind of have to think about it. Being genuinely interested in other people. If I think about the people at work and the people that I think are good communicators and the ones that I'm excited to see, they're often people who I think care about me. They are people who are genuinely happy to see me when we encounter one another. They're people who know a little bit about my life. And so being genuinely interested in other people can go such a long way to have people open their eyes and to listen to you. So that's one fundamental principle. How about just a smile? How about approachability? How important is that in communication skills? People who are unapproachable, who kind of go around grousing around, portraying a persona that's not approachable, are people that, you don't necessarily want to go communicate with them because they don't seem like they're in a good mood. So having a smile and really meaning it obviously is sometimes more difficult on some days than others, but that approachability factor again, figures into how you communicate and how people are open to receive your communication. This one's in there. Remembering that a person's name is the sweetest and most important sound in any language. People like to have you call them by their name, especially when you're in a leadership position. It makes them realize that you know who they are, that they are important to you. And this can be a challenge in emergency medicine. I will say, working in a big hospital with 200 plus nurses and tons of other support staff, I have a tough time remembering people's names, but I really try. And I really try to use their name when I see them. And sometimes I will say the wrong name. I will admit it. Nobody is perfect at this. It will happen. You give it a laugh. You say, I'm sorry. People forget. But the fact is, you got to try. People's names are important. They like to hear you say their name. When you say their name, again, it's the sweetest sound that people will hear, he says in his book. We're going to spend a little bit on this in a moment, but being a good listener and encouraging others to talk about themselves. The more people talk, again, it makes them feel important, and getting them to talk about their feelings, again, makes you seem like a good communicator. Even though they're doing the communicating and you're open to it, that opens this bridge of communication that can go such a long way. So getting others to talk about themselves, and then talking in terms of the other person's interests, keeping in mind who you're talking to, what is their motivation, what is their perspective, talking in terms of what they are really in it for can also make you a more effective communicator and a more effective relator to other people. And then finally, making the other person feel important. Dale Carnegie in his book talks about how, there's like fundamental needs that we all have. We have a need for shelter, we have a need for safety, and, these kind of basic needs. But people fundamentally are motivated to feel important. Everybody wants to feel important, no matter what your position is, whether you're in leadership or not in leadership. People want to feel important. So making people feel important, that they're important to you, and sincerely doing that can, again, really, really enhance your relationships and therefore lead to better communication skills and styles. The listening part is so important, and I think it's worth mentioning, because I think when we talk about leadership and communication, we talk a lot about what's coming out of our mouth and the sounds that we're making and the words that we use, things like that. But obviously, being a good listener and letting other people talk and listening to what they have to say is so important. And in this day and age, the one piece of advice I'll give everyone that I find incredibly important is that, especially at work, listening doesn't just mean that you're not talking. It also means that you're paying attention. And these days, with cell phones and laptop computers and meetings, just being not the one that's talking, but being on your phone or being on a laptop computer working does not mean that you're listening. And so to me, being a good listener actually means that you're listening. You're actively listening and taking in what somebody else has to say. And just because you're not talking and you're doing something else does not mean that you're listening. And so I would say that when I mean be a good listener, I mean like an active listener who's actually listening to the other person and generally interested in what they have to say. So let's transition and talk a little bit about people's roles in departments, because this actually influences how you communicate with people. So in a department, if you're talking about a department chair, obviously the department chair has a different relationship to the faculty and the residents in the department and the other staff than does the program director. The program director has to communicate with faculty, but isn't necessarily their boss, and so has to sometimes find a way to relate to faculty and motivate them to do what they need to get done in a way that's different than obviously a department chair. So your communication style in those two situations might be a little different. A division head who's in charge of other faculty members or oversees other faculty members is a mentor, is a supporter, has a different style to communicate with those people than maybe somebody else. A fellowship director who's working with fellows, again, more supportive, different communication style, maybe, than how they would deal with other people. So when you're in a leadership role, you have to think about who your constituents are, who are the people that you care about, that you work for really, and what motivates them, and how can I relate to you better? And that will kind of determine a little bit of what communication style I might use in a given situation. So I want to share with you some communication, like kind of faculty development type communication tools, just a couple examples. There are a lot of these out there that are kind of in the business world, but are adaptable for our purposes as well. And there's some good ones that you can use either personally to develop your own skills, or consider for a faculty development exercise or team building exercise at work. And some of these are really useful to get insight as to how you communicate, but also understand how others that you work with communicate. So I just want to share a couple of these with you and show you some of the details and how they might be able to help you. Some of these are really detailed, and so I'm not going to get into all the details, but just to give you a little taste of what they're like. So this first one is this book, and it's a program that's called The Magic of Communication Styles. And it's one of these kind of analytic programs where you sort of map out your communication style, and others can do it as well. And then you look at each other and you learn how to communicate better with one another. And it's kind of interesting. And so let me just tell you the fundamentals of how it works. So they kind of boil it down into some motivations for communication. And so the reason I think this is important is because, having gone through these exercises with my team and my faculty at work, I would say that it is kind of helpful. And a residency could even do this as well. Any kind of a program where people work together in a team, it can be really helpful to get some insight into your own communication style and into others. So in this particular tool, they have people map on these different, they have them map your own perception of your communication style onto these different continuums. So the first one here is about, when you communicate, are you somebody who's more task oriented, or are you someone who's more people oriented? And most people don't fall at one end or the other. They actually fall somewhere in the middle or towards one side or the other. So the book would say, look at this grid and then kind of decide where you fall. People who are really task oriented in their communication, they want to kind of get to the point. They want to get something done with the communication. They might be someone who's more of a direct communicator, kind of like, let's just get to the point. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. This might be someone in personality wise who can come across a little overbearing, but it might be someone who's pretty pragmatic, might be someone who tends to like competition, again, because it's sort of task oriented, but might be someone who overlooks the details and sort of just trying to get something done. Somebody who's more people oriented in their communication is someone who is more focused on building a relationship with someone, thinking a lot about how the personal aspects of that communication interaction matter. That might be someone who's pretty outgoing, someone who might be good at persuading people to go one way or the other. It could be something in their personality that they could have time management challenges, because again, they're not so task oriented, and someone who really cares a lot about how other people feel. So think about yourself and how you communicate, and think about other people around you and sort of where they would fall on this continuum. And I think we all have some perception of where we kind of fall on that continuum. The other axis here is how, when you communicate, you focus either on the big picture or on the details. So people who are kind of big picture focused are people who kind of expect everything to just work out in the end. They talk sort of in terms of generalities, and they might miss like the details or the potential problems in a scenario because they're just thinking kind of big picture. And then there's people who really focus on the details. They're kind of our analytical people. They will spot potential problems in what you're talking about. And they're really good at that, at problem solving. And they probably are going to have a lot of questions for you. And so again, knowing in your group or people you work with, or how you are, where you fall on this continuum can be really helpful when you're engaging in a conversation with someone. So again, think about yourself, people at work, kind of where they might fall on this particular axis. So the book has you, this exercise has you map out, I'm sort of on this part of the axis and I'm more up here, and then you sort of draw yourself out in a quadrant, and it gives you these 12 different styles of communication. And the book makes a point, and the exercise makes a point about how there's blends and people aren't purely one thing. And there are some other overlapping styles when you blend some of them together. But this is kind of fundamentally the exercise of mapping yourself out to one of these communication styles. And so as you kind of map yourself out to the axis to where this falls, then you start to learn a little bit about what that type of person or what that communication style brings with it, both the pros and cons. So let me give you a couple examples of some wedges in this pie and what this exercise would tell you, what kind of insight it might give you into what this means. So let's take, for example, first let me give you a little more detail about what these kind of details are. So if you kind of fall in that quadrant between task and big picture, you're the doer, you're the motivator, you're the challenger. You're someone who's more task and big picture oriented, as that axis would have told us. More on the other side, on the people side, we see people who are people oriented, but they fall into the big picture or the detail side. And so that kind of, as you go around, you're like, okay, I see it. The perfectionist kind of is in the detail, task oriented quadrant, makes some sense. In addition to that, you overlay what the motivation is for people as they're fitting into these communication styles. So somebody who's in that people quadrant, their primary motivator is people. They're the persuader, they're the promoter, they're the influencer. People who fall in that lower quadrant between the details and the people are people who want to kind of stay in the safe zone. They want to sort of stick in a place that's less risk, more detail oriented. And then you switch over to the people who are the analyzers and the solvers, and people who are really focused on tasks, and their motivation is to kind of keep order, maintain order, And then you move into the other quadrant where you have your action people, your people who want to get things done and they see the big picture and let's just move forward and that kind of thing. So let's take a wedge here and let's talk about the influencer. So an influencer is somebody who communicates pretty easily, gets along effortlessly with people. They express themselves pretty naturally. They can understand where other people are coming from. They're naturally persuasive, but they're not very pushy. And so if you're dealing with someone like this and you're trying to communicate with them, what can you do to sort of enhance your communication? Well, they want you to be enthusiastic. They want to hear about what the choices are. They want to know what they can do and what their input should be into decisions. And you want to focus a little bit more about how your plans will benefit the people rather than the kind of vision behind the plan. So this tool will help give you some insight into dealing with someone who's like an influencer when you kind of learn who that person is on your team. And you can probably even think about your teams and people who you can already get an idea sometimes of where they fall in these pieces of the pie. Let's talk about the perfectionist. The perfectionist is the kind of person who wants to use something really methodological, a problem-based approach, and they kind of look at life that way. It's a series of problems that I have to kind of figure out. And they tend to be into complex concepts, and they're more into solutions and coming up with solutions than really people's feelings, for example. And so how do you deal with someone who's like that, who's really into details and less into the people part of things? Well, they're going to want to know details. So if you're going to communicate with them, you got to be prepared for them to have a lot of questions and to have some of that nitty-gritty detail because they're going to be interested in it. And they're going to bring up things that you haven't heard about before. So you have to be prepared to be open to those and consider them because maybe you haven't heard about them before. And that person's really talented in your group at bringing up those points. And they kind of want changes to be a little bit slower. They want to know what the logic is behind the change. So you want to be careful about trying to push things on them too fast without them having a chance to kind of think about it. So I think this is helpful when you start to learn about people that you work with and think about these communication challenges that you might have with someone. And so doing this kind of exercise, especially if you're running into barriers, might give you some insight into how to deal with someone a little more effectively. The other tool, the second tool I want to mention is this thing called DISC, and you've probably heard of this. This is kind of a personality style test, like a strength finder exercise, something like that. But it's kind of useful. We did this one in our faculty several years back, and I found it actually really interesting. We all you do a series of questions and ask you little phrases and you say yes, yes, no, no, and it spits out sort of, you are a influencer with a little bit of dominance, and it tells you a little about yourself. And so we did this in the faculty and we had this little map and we all went up and put a pin like where we were on this spectrum. And we learned that we had people in all of these quadrants on the faculty. And then you realize like, it's really nice to make teams of people that have different ways of looking at things and, kind of match up people who have different styles. And so it's really interesting. It's an interesting exercise, and it's interesting for yourself to realize where you do fall on this and other people in the faculty who are kind of like you. So if you look at this, you see that there's the D is for dominance. These are people who like results. They're really motivated by power. They fear losing control. These are people who are usually really self-confident. They can be pretty direct. They may be risk takers, but here are some of their limitations it tells us. They have a lack of concern for others. They may be kind of impatient. They could be a little insensitive. You can probably think of some people you work with that kind of fall into this quadrant. Now look over at the influencer. These are your people who are enthusiastic and they like to collaborate. They're motivated by the group recognizing them, and they love group activities and they like friendly relationships. They don't want to be rejected by anyone. They don't want to lose their influence or feel disapproved of or even be ignored. And often they can be really charming, enthusiastic, the way that they relate to you, very sociable. Maybe some of their limitations that they're a little more impulsive. Maybe they're a little more scattered. Maybe they don't follow through on the details as much as someone else. Think about people at work. I'm sure you can think of people who fall into this category. And so you go through the chart here. I like the steadiness. These are really good people to have in a group. These are people who are the supporters. They just want to kind of stabilize everything. They like to collaborate, but they like stable environments. They like to be appreciated. They like to cooperate, and they like to help other people. And they are very patient people. They're good people to have on a team to help stabilize some of the other influences that you have in your communication going on in a team, for example. They're pretty calm. They're good listeners, very humble people, but maybe they're a little overly accommodating and they don't really want to change anything, and maybe they're a little indecisive. And so that's their kind of negative to what their communication style, the way they approach problems. And so again, balancing that kind of personality or that communication style with someone else can be really useful. And then you have the other corner here about conscientiousness. This is the person who is really wants to be accurate about things. They also like stability. They like to challenge assumptions, and they want opportunities to use their expertise and gain knowledge. And they like quality and the details. And they're afraid of being criticized. They don't like slipshod methods or kind of sloppy, attention to details. They don't want to be wrong, and they're precise people. These are really important people to have on a team, to kind of pay attention to all those details if you have other people on the team who are not so detail oriented. But they may be overcritical of others because of their sloppy methods, and they may be spend too much time in the weeds analyzing things, and could be a little isolated because of that. So this is kind of a useful exercise. Learn about other people. Who are you? What are your limitations? Once I learned, kind of where I fell, I look at those limitations. I say, yeah, I do struggle with that. That's something I'm working on. And so it can help you know where your blind spots are, where the areas are that you could improve. And I think it can give you some insight if you don't already have it. What's interesting also is that sometimes I think of either that I know myself and I fall up where I fall on one of these things. But is that actually where you fall? Is that actually, sometimes our self-perception is different than how others perceive us, of course. So when you do these kind of exercises, it'll tell a little bit about even how your voice should be in communicating with this type of person, how the communication do's and the communication don'ts, the things that can help them open up and make them feel that you're speaking to them in their language, and things that cause them to shut down. So this dominant personality, the person that can be pretty overbearing and is motivated by power, they don't want people to ramble on. They don't want to just chit chat with you. And if you challenge them, they will shut you down. They also don't want you to promise something you can't deliver. This is something you often see, honestly, in chairs and things like that. The people that kind of because they're motivated by power, they want to rise up the structure. And so I think we've all seen a little bit of this in people that we may have known along the way or know right now. And then you go along the spectrum here, and you see that these advice things are kind of useful. If I know that somebody is one of these kind of slow and steady people, I know that I can't force them to just give me an answer right now. They want to think about it. I can't interrupt them. They want to be heard. And just because they're willing to go along at the moment doesn't mean they necessarily agree with me. So important to kind of circle back to that person, see if they have any thoughts later, or in a more private setting, whether they had something they wanted to say that they didn't get to share in that setting. So can give you some helpful ways to communicate with them a little differently that will really make them feel part of the team and make you a great leader. You come across as like this very sensitive, knowledgeable person, when really you're just tailoring your communication style to really make sure that you're communicating well with everybody that you work with. So I want to take a minute to just think about, again, sort of a step back, think if something like that would be useful for you or for people you work with. Could this be something that you do at a faculty meeting or a faculty development exercise, or at a division meeting, something like that, or in a residency program that might benefit your team and help them understand each other a little bit better, especially if you're in a place where communication seems to be a challenge. This could be something that really helps you. So I might suggest it to somebody that maybe we could do one of these at a retreat or something. They're usually pretty fun, and it brings up a lot of conversation. People really like to talk about themselves and their personalities and how they perceive others, and they like to also relate to other people. So I just want you to think about that a little bit. Now, let me just close in the last few slides here about other aspects to communication and give you some other little tidbits from my experiences. So, communication also is how you talk to people. And some people are we can think of people like this that do a lot of joking and use a lot of humor. And sometimes that can be really effective with the right people, but you have to be really careful, don't you? Because sometimes, a joke comes out wrong or somebody in the group is offended. And so you have to be really careful with your use of humor and jokes. But on the other hand, people who can maintain a sense of humor about things are often in a group, really appreciated. So it can break the tension sometimes in a meeting. You just have to be careful about how you do it. So think about how you use that in your communication and how maybe it's something that you stay away from. I'm not the best joke teller. I tend to stay away from jokes and humor because I usually just I don't do well at it. But some people are really good at this, and it really enhances their communication style. The volume of your voice. Are you a loud talker or are you a soft talker? We have all types of these on our faculty. I can think of somebody on our faculty who's kind of a soft talker, but who is like a really effective communicator, because when he talks, you have to really focus on what he's saying, and it's not aggressive. And it's really interesting how my listening and how my communication with this person, I modulate it when I'm talking to them, and I'm careful about how loud I'm being, So the volume of your voice, do you have any insight into whether you're a loud talker or a soft talker and how people perceive that? Could it be something that you could modulate? And then the efficiency of your language. And what I mean by this is, if you were to actually write down the things that you say, if it were actually a written narrative, not that that's how we talk, we don't talk like written narratives, but would there be a ton of extra words in there that actually don't mean anything, that don't get you to a point? And sometimes that can really take away from your communication effectiveness. If you're kind of rambling on and like using a lot of extra words that you don't really need. And this is something that, I definitely have struggled with and I continue to work on. And I think that this is something that we lack insight. Often the people who do this, they don't really know that they do it. And so this is why I say to get a little bit of feedback about your communication style can sometimes point out things like this that you don't even realize that you do. And I've been pretty good about asking for feedback, and I've really tried to work on some of the things that I do when I'm communicating, and I've really tried, and I'm still working on it. So it is a lifetime of work on this. But this is another aspect to how you communicate that you may not even think of. That pay a little attention about the words that come out of your mouth and how precise your language is and the efficiency of what you say. Okay, I cannot talk about communication without mentioning email. Although I only have one slide, I'm not going to talk about email a ton. But this day and age, especially in emergency medicine, we do so much of our communication through email because of our asynchronous schedules. And it is just sort of the way that we do things now. But let me tell you, and probably a lot of you out there would agree with me, that we learn our lessons about communicating through email by making mistakes. And I have made a lot of them myself and seen others. And it is just such an area that's fraught with peril. It is so convenient to shoot off an email. And there are so many ways that it has made our lives so much better, right? You want to make an announcement about a meeting, you want to remind people about something. There's so many ways that it can help us. But I think we all know at this point that it is not a good communication tool for real communication. It is not something you want to use to communicate things that are controversial, that are emotional. And, a lot of the times that's where we find ourselves. We find ourselves at 2 a.m. or replying to some email in a bit of a heightened emotional state because we've got something we got to get off our chest. And I just want to take this opportunity to caution you that it is not a good communication method for things like that. Communication styles, all these things that I've talked about are about sort of face-to-face communication, and that's often it just is the best way to communicate for so many things. And sometimes you can't avoid the email. Don't get me wrong. Do I never send an email that like has something controversial? Of course I do. I have to. That's sometimes people, they're just not available to talk otherwise. But I also have seen those things go wrong, right? Somebody reads your email and they take something that you said the wrong way. It comes across in the written form as much more serious and like a big deal sometimes when you write it down, when in reality, if you would have said it out loud, it would have come out of your mouth much differently. So be very careful with email and interpreting others' communication. Don't overreact to emails. Don't write emotional emails. Like write the old thing, like write a draft of something, save it, think about it. Sometimes you go back, you edit your draft. Sometimes you never send it at all. But consider often just making an appointment to talk to people. Find a time when you can talk to people. These days I send much fewer emails than I used to, and I'm much more likely to call somebody or try to go talk to them than I am to send an email because I've just seen it go sideways so many times. And so be very careful there. It's just a place where you can step into a lot of misunderstandings, and then you have to have a whole different communication style to deal with the misunderstanding, and you have to now figure it out from the beginning, and you've just wasted time. So be careful with email. It is a very frequent mode of communication, and there is a certain style to use with email. Totally different talk, but be careful there. And then I would just encourage everybody to take some time to self-reflect on your communication style and those around you. Think about things that you'd like to change about how you communicate, things that you would like to ask others in order to get feedback. How can you improve? Have you ever gotten feedback about your communication style? This is a really good way for professional development to occur and a way to really move the game forward for yourself. And then those people around you, if you think about people that you work with or you have worked with, who are great communicators? Why were they great communicators? What do you think they did that made them such a good communicator? Was it the way that was it their voice? Was it their use of humor? Was it their efficiency of language? Was it the fact that they really personalized their communication? Was it just that they were a good listener? what is it about them that makes them a good communicator? And I think about that a lot. And I really try to, you have those role models in so many different areas of your professional life. And this is one of them. If you really think about effective communicators and how they do it really well, it's not just that they're smart people. It's not just smarts, and smarts certainly impresses me, but it's about how they relate to people, how they express themselves, how they take the time to listen to others. All of that really matters when you talk about someone who's a good communicator. How do you communicate with others from a constituent point of view? So if you've got your chair or your leader and you're the person in the lower power position, like how can you communicate more effectively with that person to get them to hear you more? So I want to stop there. I've been talking for almost 40 minutes to just get some feedback and generate a little discussion of people to share their experiences, their insights to this, maybe other tools that they've seen that are really effective. And I just want to say thanks everybody for listening to my little spiel. I appreciate it.
Hey, Jan, I wanted to really thank you. I think that was fantastic. I have a question, actually. You brought up the sense of humor and leadership style. How do you suggest, if you are not the chair, if you're not the supreme leader, but someone in that position says something that they may play off as a joke, but in fact it's something that's offensive? And how do you challenge them without being off-putting yourself?
Yeah, that is a tough one, and I think that kind of it's fraught with danger. I've seen
Mhm.
people get their heads bitten off, in trying to call someone out and something like that. I think you have to know your chair well and kind of get a little bit of a feel for how they would react to that type of a challenge, especially in a public setting. They can often really react poorly to that. That might be something that I address with them privately later, or make a comment to someone like, as a faculty member, we all have liaison. Either if we don't have a personal relationship with the chair when you're really junior, for example, you may not have a super close relationship with the chair, but you might have like your division head or a vice chair that you go to or trust. And I would like say something if that really bothered me later, but I may not say it in that meeting. I would personally be pretty hesitant to call someone out on that. Now, clearly, if it's like really offensive, you got to say something, because you can't just let it stand that is out there. If they say something that is construed as like that's you're condoning workplace harassment, or you're saying I have seen people in meetings sort of say you're not suggesting this, right? Like that sort of a challenge, that's sort of like, I don't think you really meant that, right? And that gives them a chance to have it out, sort of recognize that maybe what they said was construed not in the way that they meant it. So that's a kind of an effective way to be like, you didn't mean that, right? Like, I've seen that done pretty effectively.
Nice. I see we have a question from Thomas Matisse. The question is kind of two pieces: methods to deal with discongruent feedback, and then he says, I meant methods to deal with giving discongruent feedback as a leader.
So when you say discongruent feedback, do you mean negative feedback, or you mean something that people don't like, the person doesn't like see it in themselves, but it's true? Like, what is that? I would like to know a little bit more about what kind of scenario you're thinking about.
He said yes to both. Thomas, feel free to jump on in to clarify it more if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, certainly feedback is a challenge, and is like another really good topic to talk about how to do that well. Sometimes, negative feedback is difficult to deliver, and there's a whole set of pearls about how to do that. Obviously, private space, and giving people the chance to reflect on their own behavior. And I think discongruent to feedback, to me, points to that scenario where you're giving someone some feedback, you're trying to be honest, and yet they don't perceive what you're saying. And I think that the best way to deal with that is to validate, okay, I can see that you're not really agreeing, and give them a chance to verbalize why they don't agree with that. But that's why real-time feedback and giving examples of what you mean, it can be really helpful, because sometimes when we give feedback, we speak in these generalities. Sometimes people think that you're a little this or that, and people say, I don't see that, I don't know what you're talking about. So where did that comment come from? Then you have to actually give them the benefit of like, well, let me get a little more specific to tell you what I mean, because sometimes they're just not understanding what you're trying to say. So I really do try to give examples, and that's why real-time feedback is so much better than accumulated summative feedback, where you get this written feedback that's so general and you don't know where it came from. And so, giving examples can be a way to break through that barrier. That's I guess, and maybe Marianne, maybe you have some other answers. You've been around a long time and done this really well. And do you agree with that?
Yes, I too am old. And I agree. I think whenever you can bring it down to specific examples, it makes it more workable for both people. I will say one of the ways that I read the question as discongruent feedback was more, let's say you're the program director and you have attending A says, this is the worst resident I've ever worked with, and attending B, best resident I've ever worked with. I will point out there's actually studies out there that have to do with the gender of the resident and the gender of the attending involved that shows there's often, there's patterns that occur that different qualities, and I'm so sorry because I can't quote the article. I think the last name of the author was Lee, where that's exactly what happened, essentially, that the female residents were often praised for certain qualities that the male residents, actually the male residents were praised for being assertive or aggressive, one could pursue it as, and that the female residents were discouraged from those qualities. It's interesting because I've had obviously a lot of different attendings that try to give feedback about the residents, and then it's about sifting, over time. You have to figure out, one of them might have like a hair trigger irritant. One of them, like, it's not always about the resident. Sometimes it's the faculty member. And how do you both sift through what the right thing to tell the resident is? And then how do you also guide the faculty member to understand that whether they're on one side or the other side of the scale, the too critical or the too easygoing, how can you perhaps help guide them? And I think that's something that comes with time and practice. And also,
I agree.
And also knowing your own blind spots, right? And it's about trying to figure out what your own blind spots are in terms of how are you having that conversation.
I agree. I think the program director plays a really important role there in sort of having the decoder ring and helping to, like, just sort of for a resident navigate that feeling. And as a faculty member, sometimes we get discongruent feedback. I've definitely had evals that say, like, she's the best, and then other ones like, no, I really don't like the way that she does this or that, and it's hard to reconcile those two things. Like, which one is it? Am I great, or and I think, like, people do give positive. I always look at the negative as an opportunity to improve. I try to, I think that it probably is human nature to have discongruent views of people, and so there's going to be people who perceive you different ways. And so I love the positive, but I always really appreciate the negative, because I know it takes courage to give negative feedback. And I try to, also, I agree that contextualize it as much as possible is really helpful.
Patrick M has a question. He is a very direct communicator. Good for you, Patrick. And many times it comes off as insensitive, especially when dealing with busy residents. Do you have any tricks on delivering information in a direct manner, but in a way where it doesn't come off wrong?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it does have to do with the things that you can modulate to help assist the delivery of direct communication are things like your body language, the volume of your voice. You can have the words be direct, but you don't necessarily have to come off as aggressive. And sometimes those are two different areas of communication. It's how you're perceived in your stance and how you are in your physical presence. And then there's also the words that can be direct. So, for example, there used to be a residency coordinator who worked here, and I used to walk into his office, and he was sitting at a desk, but I would walk in and I would sort of like stand next to him because there was another chair there, and I would like talk to him about what he was working on. And down the line, he gave me this feedback that I came across as like really overbearing and aggressive, and because he saw me as hovering over him and like criticizing him from that position, and I didn't even really appreciate that, like the way that I came to the room and like stood there was so off-putting, like just that fact, even though the words that were coming out of my mouth, he wasn't saying that the words were wrong, but just the way that I was standing there, which was interesting. So I do think that, like, you know, you can, if you are a direct communicator, to be sensitive about those other things that could really make it worse, and could exacerbate the perception of you as a direct communicator.
I think one of the things I would also add, because I have also been told I'm a very direct communicator. I don't know if it's New Yorker in me, but I've been told that the people involved are very clear about where I'm coming from, is the concept of praise in public and critique in private. And I think that this is one of those things where it's very important to have very concrete examples. And I often will do something where at the beginning of the shift, I may take someone and say, listen, I want to try to focus on giving everybody some sort of feedback to help them improve. Is it okay if at the end of the shift we have a conversation? And so they're prepped and they know it's going to come. And obviously, you know, you can never be faulted for praising good qualities either. So, you know, everybody does something well. Even the worst people do something well. Figure out what the something well is, and make sure you also point that out in your conversation.
Yeah, balancing the output, you know, is a good way to go too. Yeah.
And
Direct communication can also be modulated by, you know, someone who's really direct though, but then asks for, like, well, what do you think about that? You know, kind of opens the stage up for someone else to say something, can help also soften the perception of your communication because you're open to others, right?
True. And I think the idea that, you know, Wally Carter told me as I took on the program director role, I said, what's your advice? And he says, just try to be kind. So you can be direct and also be kind. And if you put the framework in terms of, you know, I'm telling you this because I want you to be able to be the best doctor you can be, or I'm telling you this because I don't want you to get fired at your next job, or, you know, whatever it is. Like, I'm really doing this for you, even though it may be a bitter pill to swallow.
Right. That's, yeah, to share what your motivation is, that it's not, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. Like, my motivation is to help you. That's where it's coming from. Yep.
Yeah, one of my other classic lines in this conversation is usually, this is the last time people are going to try and help you when you're doing something, as opposed to telling you you're just wrong and maybe get fired.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. I you know, especially residents or fellows or junior faculty, I always, you know, try to put it in the frame of, you know, you're here to learn, and you're not here just to learn medicine. You're also here to learn, you know, lots of other things,
Yeah.
and to try, you know, whether it's professionalism or other kind of skills, interpersonal skills like that, you're also developing that. You're learning. It's okay to, like, make mistakes, and you know, that's part of what you're learning. So don't, you know, I just shaping this learning makes it a little like, okay, it's not just me, I'm still learning.
So Patrick responds with, "Ooh, I like that. I'm not sure which part of it he likes, but that's great. Thank you, Patrick."
Good, we're helpful. Yay.
Oh, learning how to be a professional. Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it. This is awesome. I think, Dr. Schoenberger, that this may close out the session. I really want to thank you. I think that was an absolutely fantastic talk. I can think of a number of people that I want to share this with. Wait. Stephanie Sampson says, thank you. This was great. And
thank you. I appreciate it.
Patrick also added, thank you all. Great talk. Thank you guys. And we love you, Jan, from Jessica Smith. You know,
thank you.
This is a lot of fun.
Yay. Hi, Jessica.
I certainly can think of a number of people that I think would benefit from this, and they may get the message tomorrow with a little email once it gets put up online. And just as a reminder to everybody, the Cord Connects talks are recorded each month, and we put them up online, and they're all available at cordem.org events. And then you can search for Cord Connects and you can find it there. This will be posted tomorrow by Tina. Thank you very much, Tina, for your hard work.
Thank
you. You know, if you have particular topics that you believe would be of benefit, feel free to email either myself or Tina or Moshe Weisberg, and we would be thrilled to pieces to explore topics that the community really wants to hear about. This was a fantastic topic, Jen. So thank you so much, and thanks very much for Moshe Weisberg, A, coming up with the topic, and B, getting you to talk about it. So,
Thanks, Cord. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Schoenberger. Thank you, Tina. And thanks everybody else for listening in for the whole time.